Hey everyone, I just started a Substack, so if you're interested in reading my writings, then you can do that right now. There's already stuff to read at alexoconnor.com. And paid members have early access right now to the full episode with Destiny. There's one particular moment in your discussion with Jordan Peterson that I think went sort of semi-viral. I kept seeing it all over the place and YouTube Shorts and stuff where you make a comparison to what he calls like gigantism or sort of big government and the Catholic Church, where you say, well, look, a lot of people say that they're suspicious of gigantism, they're suspicious of big companies and big government, and yet they'll be in favor of something like the Catholic Church.
Like, I could imagine somebody saying that, like, they don't trust, like, a large government, they think there's too much, prone to tyranny or something like that, but also be supportive of an institution like the Catholic Church, which is literally, one guy who has a direct line to God.
But they can't tax.
And
they don't have a military. They can't conscript you.
True,
right?
Yeah.
And they can't throw you in jail.
That is true, yeah. I mean...
Well, those are major and significant. I mean, I get the overlap. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
And Peterson says, yeah, but they can't tax you. They don't have a military. They can't conscript you. They can't put you in jail.
Can only send you to hell, eternal pain and suffering, I guess.
I wondered, because that moment sort of got a lot of attention. I wonder what your sort of post-mortem on that particular part was.
In terms of, should I have, a snappier comeback?
Do you think he was right? Do you think?
No, I think it's a ridiculous point. The idea that just because something is larger means it's intrinsically bad, or that something is smaller is intrinsically good. Mm-hmm. I don't think that being large or small is necessarily has the characteristic of being good or bad. I think that you would have to do a more honest analysis of a particular thing to arrive at an actual good understanding of what's going on. Some of the most tyrannical, dictatorial, fascist people can be abusive parents, and the only control that they have might be over a singular child. So obviously gigantism isn't at play here. And I think that we have some pretty large entities that do a really good job. The churches and different denominations can do a lot of good throughout a lot of society. I mean, you bring up the point that they don't have armies or they can't tax you. I mean, Walmart and Amazon can't tax me, but some people might say that they engage in immoral practices, like whether or not you have the ability to deploy some sort of force, whether or not you have the ability to collect taxes. I don't think necessarily make you good or bad. I don't think a large country that collects taxes is worse than a small country that collects taxes because of gigantism. It's just not that just felt like a buzzword that I'd never even heard before, that gigantism is necessarily has the properties of badness in it. It just seems really silly. But most of those arguments felt like I'm trying to figure out how to navigate. If I was truly in the old blood sports days, and I'm not trying to be nice to everybody so I get invited back onto shows, I would just say let's figure out some examples and show me, can you demonstrate on a particular thing, why is this bad just because of the size of the particular thing? You think the United States government is bad because of gigantism? Okay, well, let's say I cut the union in half and now we got 25 states. Is it half as bad as it was before? What level of badness is even influenced by the size? Or what do we have to start peeling out before it becomes bad? Let's say the United States government can no longer collect taxes and doesn't have an exclusive use on force.
Yeah.
Is it no longer bad at that point? The idea that badness is related to large or small is just ridiculous. Why do you work for the Daily Wire? It's a larger company than you just being self-employed. Have you become more bad working for a larger company? Or what if the Daily... it's just such a ridiculous notion.
But that seemed to be, in particular, what you just said there, if the government can no longer tax and can no longer conscript you or put you in jail... I don't know if it would necessarily make it less bad. I'm not sure if the argument is gigantism is bad in the sense that it produces a worse outcome, or the organizations that are bigger are worse, but that with gigantism comes a bigger risk that if that company is bad, the badness is so much worse. So, for example, if the US government can't put you in jail anymore, if it's some horribly corrupt government, then maybe its inability to jail you in corrupt ways is better. Right, maybe that does sort of relieve it of some of that power. It doesn't mean that its actual intentions or ideology or anything actually changes. It's just that by being bigger, by having more power, it means that when things go wrong, they go wrong much worse.
That's fine. That's an Alex O'Connor argument, not a Jordan Peterson argument. If you want to make the argument that a thing being larger necessarily means that a bad thing can be so much worse because of the size, I would obviously agree with that. And my obvious retort would be, but the good that it can accomplish as a large thing is also much larger.
For sure.
So it's a thing that you have to very carefully try to extract the benefits from while creating enough checks and balances, not to slow down the benefits, but to keep in control the negatives. But yeah, I would of course agree with that. But I mean, mean, like in economics, there's a concept called an economy of scale, that a large enough corporation, a large enough firm can create a product, not just create tons of products, but the marginal cost of each product, the per product cost, is actually lower than what an individual can create that particular product for, just by virtue of being larger and being able to specialize and segregate different orders of the operation of whatever they're creating. So
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I did rewatch that conversation you had with Jordan Peterson quite recently, but although I remember that part and that discussion, I struggle to remember exactly the specific point that he was making. Was he just saying that bigger is worse? I mean, is that really the idea? But behind that
would be
point?
Ridiculous if that's what he was saying.
But
huh?
it seems so obviously ridiculous that it
Doesn't
almost
it? Yeah,
makes
it
me
does, doesn't it?
it makes me tempted to think that he must have been saying something more like what I'm saying, that people are scared of gigantism, right? And I suppose your point about the Catholic Church, right? Somebody says like they don't like big government or whatever, but they're okay with the Catholic Church. And Peterson saying, well, they can't tax you and stuff. Like maybe like you would, like even those people who was in support of the Catholic Church would say, well, to be honest, if the Catholic Church started trying to tax people and throw people in jail and developed a military, then actually maybe I would start to be a little concerned about it. And why? Not because Catholicism would change, not because, the Pope would have different moral views or anything, but just because of the fact that there's something more like unnerving about a company getting, or an organization getting, more power and sort of bigger institutions.
I don't agree with that anymore.
You don't think?
I think that most people are pretty close in terms of like how they want the world to look.
Mm-hmm.
I think that most people are very close in terms of principled positions. I think that the application of those things is what causes people to diverge so much. And I think that if you were to ask a person if they were comfortable with like a church being armed or something like that, I think that different people at different points of time would say in some cases, yeah, actually, you know what, that would be awesome. And in other cases, they say absolutely not. I think I try to give an example for both sides. I can't think of one on the left right now, but like on the right, like I think that there are tons of things that Donald Trump has done that Bush era neoconservatives would have shuddered in agony. The idea that a man who's cheating on his wife or making fun of prisoners of war, or a guy who talks about suspending the Constitution, or a guy that talks about like any of the number of things that he's done are just so contrary to things that used to be principled positions that conservatives have. But I think that at the end of the day, I don't think people are very principally tied to anything. I think that what happens is I think people have they very applied level disagreements, but because nobody actually does any of the grounding for any of their beliefs, there's a lot of like normative confusion with their actual applied their applied like physical positions, and then what happens is we get in this weird world where people think that they're really far apart on something, and they're actually probably done. To ground this on an example, I think a really good example is our vaccine mandates. My opinion on the moral level is I actually think there's about 100% congruity in worldwide society, or at least America and the West, on vaccine mandates. In that, if you had a virus and I could prove to you 100% that the lethality rate of this virus is 0.0001%, and at worst it's a cold, I don't think anybody in society would be okay mandating that vaccine. But if I could demonstrate a virus that incubated for 2 weeks and had a 50% fatality rate, I think conservatives would be exercising their Second Amendment right to force everybody to get vaccinated.
Right.
It wouldn't even be a question.
Right,
You're not going
sure.
I'm not going to get infected. Yeah. So people think that they have like these principal differences, like, well, is a mandate okay or not okay? But that's not really, what you're really arguing about is how dangerous do you think the virus is?
Trust in our news media is at an all-time low, and people often make up their minds about important and subtle issues based on headlines alone. And that's not to mention the bias that seeps into reporting. But there's good news. Today's sponsor, Ground News, can help us with this. Ground News has sponsored the channel for a while now, and with good reason. They aggregate thousands of local and international news outlets in one place, allowing you to compare headlines directly. And for every story, they provide a quick breakdown of the political leaning of the sources, as well as a rating of their reliability and even information about who owns the sources. And using the blind spot feature, I can see which stories are being under or over-reported by the left or the right. So, depending on what kind of news I read, stories that I would otherwise miss. Take a look at this story. Stanford's top disinformation research group collapses under pressure. I can see a percentage breakdown of the political leaning of the sources and the ownership information, but also look at the different headlines. The right-wing Breitbart says Stanford's Internet Observatory censorship machine crumbles under its own weight, whereas the left-leaning NPR says a major disinformation research team's future is uncertain after political attacks. By comparing these directly in the same place, you can see right in front of you how political political bias can shape reporting on the same story. Ground News is a brilliant tool for becoming a more savvy consumer of news. Go to ground.news/AlexOC. You can use my link for 40% off their unlimited access Vantage plan. If you want to get access to these videos early and ad-free and support the channel at the same time, as well as getting access to my exclusive writings and Q&As, then you can do all of that at alexoconnor.com. Thanks for watching, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one.